Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. And in each episode, we sit down with Delaware's top minds and leaders to gain perspective and to learn from them in ways that advance FSE's mission, which is to build capacity, raise awareness, and elevate school board leadership across our communities. And today, I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Logan Herring. Logan, I'm thrilled to have you here today, and I'm so impressed by the work you've done at the WRK Group and the transformative change, literally, that you're realizing in Wilmington. Your work spans community development, youth programming, neighborhood revitalization, and it's all aimed at empowering Wilmington's residents and fostering a stronger, more connected community. So today, for our audience, we're excited that Logan's approach to community-driven leadership, strategic planning, and financial stewardship will offer valuable insights for anyone involved in shaping schools and communities. So through today's conversations, you're going to hear perspectives on building inclusive teams, engaging with community members, and developing a vision that resonates across diverse groups. So Logan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Julia, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So you're gonna have to bear with me a minute because I want to tell a little bit more to our audience if they're not familiar with your work, which I don't know who isn't in Delaware, but you're a Wilmington native, and your work in community service began at a really young age, at the age of 14. So I'm excited for you to tell us more about that. But then you left Delaware for school, came back, and went right back to it, and you founded Delaware Elite, which was a nonprofit focused on mentoring student athletes. And since then, now, fast forward to 2016, and for the last actually, you're going to come up on a decade pretty soon. You're entering your 9th year here. Been strengthening Wilmington communities. And I think a lot of this has to do with the legacy of your grandfather, Reverend Otis Herring, who we'll talk about in today's show. So your impact goes beyond Riverside. You're on many boards, and you've been recognized as Delaware's most influential people. So we're thrilled to have you. So to jump right in, tell us a little bit about your story and how your life experiences have shaped, who you are and the leader you've become.
Yeah, so you said a mouthful, definitely, but started my work, I would say, at a very young age, and my life experiences, I think, shaped and molded me to do the work that I do. Thankful to my grandfather who did very well for himself and for the community. And so for the first, I would say, the beginning of my academic career, he paid for me to go to Wilmington Montessori School through 2nd grade. And I think that gave me a great foundation academically. And then I went to public schools through 8th grade. Then I went to St. Mark's for 2 years and then transferred and ended at Sanford School, where I graduated from. And then I went to Goucher College down in Towson, Maryland, where I played soccer and basketball. But most importantly, in the summertime, I was working with the inner city youth from Baltimore doing reading enrichment camps and sports camps. And I think that diversity through my upbringing, through school, diversity in terms of the people that I met, race, ethnicity, socioeconomically, where they came from across the world. And then also growing up in, one of the roughest neighborhoods in Wilmington, West Center City at the time. I think that diversity, that background, but also the social capital that I was able to gain and the experience in talking and dealing with different type of people has really allowed me to take advantage of that experience and really cultivate it as my expertise.
Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of what you're doing, you've prioritized diversity in your work as CEO of the WRK Group, right? And I think you've tried to build that in. Could you share with our listeners a little bit about how you've been able to do that?
Could you ask that question again? I want to make sure I fully understand.
Sure. So you've prioritized diversity in your journey, right? That's what you're
Yeah,
saying, and you're doing that now in your work with the WRK Group, right? You're doing that as
yeah,
part of
absolutely.
as the leader who you are today. And so how could we share with the audience what diversity the WRK Group and the leadership you're doing now in the east side of Wilmington looks like?
Yeah, so I think essential to this work is having that diversity across the staff, across the boards, across all
Hmm.
stakeholders. And so when you truly understand diversity, it's diversity in thought, it's diversity in experience, it's diversity in expertise. And I think that having those things involved in everything we do really allows us to look at it from all angles. So if I, brought together a team full of people that had the same experiences as me, I don't think we would benefit as much as we would from the diversity that we have brought in. So
Hmm.
everything from our leadership team to the boards to community members that we bring, all stakeholders, even our partnerships, have
Hmm.
just created this melting pot in this ecosystem that is extremely diverse, and I think it's a huge part of our success so far.
The one reason I mean, it's interesting for a lot of different reasons, right? But there are 2 points that resonate for me. One, that you're framing this as diversity of thought. So people could be similar in terms of a demographic, but really have different ways of thinking about it. And so I love that you're breaking that paradigm of what, this single definition of
Yeah,
what diversity could mean. But two, it also really resonates with me when I think about school boards.
right.
The school boards are it's a collection of community members, and they're all coming from different perspectives. They're just individuals who have decided to raise their hand and take this seat. But learning how to work through that diversity, to appreciate it, to understand, to ask questions, where's that person coming from? I think
Yeah.
that's not something that we're kind of trained to do as we go through life.
Yeah, I think a lot of that in my background comes from playing sports and coaching sports and realizing that we all have one goal, right? But we might have different ways of going about it, and we might play different roles
Hmm.
on the team to make sure we hit that goal. And so when I think about my experiences, like when I first got to college and I was on the soccer team, and there was, back then there weren't a lot of black kids playing soccer. And so on the soccer team, there was two of us, and I came in thinking that this other black kid on the team who was a year ahead of me would be very much similar to me, and he couldn't have been any more different than I
Interesting.
was. And so we clashed a lot because I'm like, well, I'm black, you're black, we're the same, and that in certain aspects that was true. But it definitely wasn't. I was more urban, and he came from a more, I think he was a military brat, and so he did a lot of
Hmm.
traveling, and so I learned so much from him, and particularly that experience. And again, just leaning on my own experience and bringing that to the workplace now, and everything we're doing with the work group has really allowed me to not judge a book by its cover, and I
Hmm.
think that's really where that diversity of thought comes in.
Yeah, I think it's a great illustration, and it's really neat too, because I think a lot of um, our experiences in our childhood or in young adulthood sort of shape who we become as leaders.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate that and tell me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is that you challenge yourself to be open to hear to understanding where someone else is coming from and what they're bringing to the table.
Yeah, I've I've been challenged enough in my lifetime to realize that I don't have all the answers. And at
Hmm.
this point of my career, and I would say just personally in general, I'm not seeking to have all the answers. I'm seeking to get the right outcome. That's the
Right.
goal. And when you take yourself out of it and you really, leave your ego at the door, I
Hmm.
think great things are possible. It's funny. Um, I'm gonna go on a little tangent right now, but uh, my family and I, over the holidays, just a few days ago, we were watching. I forget the name of it. It's like the greatest night ever. I
Hmm.
think is the name of it, but it's about all of the celebrity musicians who came together to sing "We Are the World."
Oh, I
Uh,
watched that. I
you
actually I
watched
saw
it,
that
right?
on
Yeah,
Netflix.
it's really good.
Right.
I think everyone should watch
Really
that.
good.
But it was the sign that Quincy Jones put above the door when they walked in, and it said, "Leave your egos at the door," something
Uh-huh.
to that degree. And so, I think when you're doing this work, we all have our own egos to some degree. But I think when your ego gets away in the ultimate goal, that's a problem. And so,
Yeah.
I constantly am checking myself so no one else has to do that for me.
That's fat. It's a great, yeah. The show was great. One, were you shocked to be like, is that what they look like? Like that's not how I remember them looking, like some of these like stars from before. But
Yeah,
but the idea of checking, working on yourself and leaving your own ego at the door, I think is really really important, especially if you're in a leadership position.
yeah,
So switching to our second segment, just talking about building and leading high functioning teams. That's not easy to do too, and you are running a pretty massive operation. And I
Yeah.
don't know if maybe our audience who includes board members will know this, but school district budgets are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And there aren't, running a budget that's that big it's not common, right? And I think
No.
yours is, I want to say somewhere around 600 million. That's the number
Well,
that you're.
well, yeah, I don't want to inflate the argument. The budget that I'm responsible for isn't $600 million, but the project is. And so,
Okay.
if you want to split hairs, but the budget that I'm overseeing, well, it's three organizations. I would say collectively going into this year will probably be somewhere between 13 to 15 million or something
Hmm.
around there. But we are pretty much responsible for the larger revitalization effort, which is a $600 million effort.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's nothing to sneeze at. But yeah, I definitely don't want to inflate it and say that it's six
All
hundred
right, well,
million.
let's go
I
with
don't. I
12
don't
if it
need
makes
those
you feel
problems.
better.
Okay.
12 is still a big number, and
It
managing the
is.
budget
It
of three
is.
organizations is still significant. So could we talk a little bit about how you make those financial management decisions, sort of who you lean on in your team? We talked in the first segment a little about, like, putting the right people around you and getting this diversity of thought. There's a lot of things to be responsible for a budget of that size. Who do you put around you, and how do you approach that decision making?
Yeah. So I have uh, four people on my leadership team, including myself. And so it's my COO, Kenyatta McCurdy Bird, my CFO, Laura Mood, and then my Chief Community Investment Officer, Dave Ford. And those are the three people that I lean on significantly when making these decisions. There's no
Hmm.
decision that's made in a vacuum. And honestly, I would say that 90% of my role is external, and so I have to lean on them. I would say Kenyatta runs the day to day in terms of operations.
Hmm.
Laura oversees the finances, and then Dave and Laura work together on crafting of how we're going to spend the money, how we're going to invest the money, and
Hmm.
those types of decisions. And so, constant communication is key between the four of us. We meet formally twice a week, but I would say we informally meet, have conversations every day and
Hmm.
multiple times a day as needed. And so we're very much aligned in our purpose for doing this work. We're very much aligned in our expertise and our decision making. And so, although we rarely disagree, there are times that we may not see eye to eye, but then, and you'll probably hear me say this a few times during our conversation, we always go back to the number one question we ask ourselves in doing this work is what's best for the community.
Hmm. And to draw a parallel for that, just that last question, what's best for the community? I think from a school board perspective, it's what's best for the students, right? What's better for the
Exactly.
school community?
Yep.
And you talked a little bit about, constant communication, and I just want to maybe explore that a little bit. Boards meet publicly once a month, and and I'm sure that there's communication that happens behind the scenes, right?
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about why that's important, how that builds trust, how that improves problem solving or decision making in your team, having these conversations outside of the point in time when the actual decision has to get made?
Yeah, I think that's where the rubber meets the road. Those conversations outside of the meeting. I mean, if you were to rely on touch base once a month, that would never get the job done. And so, trust is, you can't move faster than the speed of trust. And
Hmm.
trust is built through those constant communications in the relationship. And so, with me and my leadership team, it's constant communication.
Hmm.
And then you revisit all of those instances where you talked and you've done work together, and that allows you to feel like you can rely on people. And so if that happened once a month, I would constantly question what's going on between that,
Right.
and then
Right.
when they say something, can I really rely on what they're saying? And so if we're not
Hmm.
building that muscle on a daily basis, then you can't expect to put up that weight once a
Yeah.
month. And so yeah.
That's a great point. Interestingly, board membership can cycle off every 4 years. So I'm curious, how long has your leadership team been together? And we could talk a little bit about how long it takes to develop that trust and what
Yeah.
happens when a new person comes in.
Yeah, so my leadership team and I have been, well, I have to go by individual. And so Laura Mood is the newest to our leadership team, technically. She joined us a few years ago. I want to say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, as our CFO. However, she was here before all of us, and so this will make
Oh,
sense once I tell the story. So Laura was the financial, I would say the CFO, somewhat from a fractional standpoint for Kingswood, and she started her work as a contractor in 2013. She was doing this work. She had her own business for about 50 organizations around the city of Wilmington, the state of Delaware. And someone approached her and said, can you help over at Kingswood? And when she was first asked, she asked a couple of people about, Kingswood because she wasn't aware. And it's like, you don't want to go over there. Riverside is dangerous. The organization was really struggling. They've struggled, for some time now. But she's stubborn, so she decided to go anyway. A couple years into working at Kingswood, again on a fractional basis, they had hired a new executive director, and that executive director she found out was stealing money. And so she blew the whistle. She went to the board. She went to some of the local funders, and eventually the board, let him go. And then I was brought to the organization. One, I was partnering with them when I was working with the Boys and Girls Club. So I got to work with a gentleman by the name of Dave Ford. And Dave and another Dave, Big Dave Cisco, we call him Big Dave, Little Dave. Dave Ford is shorter in stature,
mhm,
and Dave Cisco is taller. And Dave was running the Laughing McHugh Foundation. Dave Cisco. Dave Cisco was one of the people that Laura called on when she needed help. And
mhm,
so both Daves were helping financially. They were helping with leadership for Kingswood and its new board, or it's trying to revitalize the board. And they both asked me to come join the board. Unbeknownst to me, they had greater involvement for me in mind.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
after I joined the board a few months later, they asked me to step in as interim executive director, and that was in February of 2016.
mhm,
And so Dave Ford was volunteering. He will always joke and say he used to carry my bag, and he still
mhm,
does. And so he was just volunteering. And so it was me and Laura and Dave kind of working together to manage the finances and try to turn things around. And then well, you know what they say how when people like break up and they say how you lose them is how you get them, or how you get them is how you lose them, or something like that.
uh-huh,
And so I'd use the same tactic on Kenyatta. I had met Kenyatta at these community meetings, organization meetings around Wilmington, and I asked her to join the REACH Riverside board when we were starting REACH Riverside in 2018. And she joined the board, and the whole idea was I was going to bring her on. And so she came on as the official COO in 2019, and she wrote her own job description. And so I could say that all four of us has somewhat been working together since 2019, and then Laura
mhm,
came and joined, like I said, a few years ago. And
mhm,
so we have an extensive history of working together,
right,
but I would say even as important as that is, we have an extensive history of working on behalf of community and, in some respects, on the behalf of Riverside and Kingswood Community Center.
mhm. So, in the absence of that long-standing relationship, any tips for building trust? If you know someone, you've got a new board member, and here they are, and you got to make these big decisions together.
Yeah, constant communication. And so
Mhm,
you can't take you can't take it for granted. And I would say you have to over communicate. And so it is a great example. We have a new board chair that started officially yesterday, January
oh,
1st,
okay, mhm,
Chip Rossi. And
uh-huh,
Chip is the market president for Bank of America. And so as he and I embark on, this new professional relationship, board chair to CEO, we are in constant communication. I mean, text messaging, phone calls,
mhm,
because in the absence of information, our brain is wired to make assumptions. That's just
mhm,
how everyone's brain is wired. And so we have to over communicate to make sure that no, we're not making the wrong assumptions. And as we communicate more, it'll allow us to communicate less, because
mhm,
then we're not filling those assumptions, but that trust is being built over time through that constant communication and developing that relationship.
yep. Um, so interesting about that when you talk about a relationship with a new board member from your perspective. Um, Through that information exchange, how much of it, and it's a rough estimate, right? But is sort of asking questions to
Yeah.
try to understand.
Yeah, I think questions are key, and we just have to be careful. And I've been on both sides of this, right? There's a difference between asking questions and being questioned.
Ah,
And
yes,
so
that's a
if
great
you're
point.
asking questions, you're looking to seek clarity and
Mm-hmm,
understanding. When you're questioning, it's almost like you're looking to get an aha or a gotcha, right?
mm-hmm,
And it definitely feels that way when you're on the other side of it. And so,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I gather a lot of inspiration from TV. So I'm going to go back to TV again. And definitely during the holiday season because I'm able to binge watch. And so I binge watched the last couple of days, the Lincoln Lawyer.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever watched The Lincoln
I
Lawyer,
haven't
but
watched that. No.
anyway, the attorney was on behalf of his client. He was asking him, did you interrogate him or did you interview him? And the investigator was like, well, I interviewed him. It was like, but when you look at, the camera, it looked like you were interrogating him. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you think about you on the other side of that, there's a difference between being interviewed and interrogated. And you understand that
Yeah.
intimately. And so I think then when we're asking questions, we have to be sure that we're doing it from an interview perspective and not an interrogating perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That
That's an
automatically
excellent point.
creates a defensive posture.
Sure, sure. That's a I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. Traditionally, my mind goes to um feeling like they need to know things, right? Like being unwilling to say, I don't understand why this works this way. So let's say I'm sure budget is the wrong example for Chip, but let's just say, I don't know, there's a construction plan or something, and it's a capital project, and there's some technical thing about construction, and the new person comes and says, or even the construction people give it to you, and you have questions about it. I mean, that's not what your technical area of expertise is, although you probably have more than most people. And feeling comfortable saying, I don't know, can you explain this to me, I think is also healthy and productive. Do you think?
Yeah, well, no, absolutely, and it's funny because those examples that you gave hypothetically are actually real things that have happened
Mm,
here, and I think we have to be extremely mindful and sensitive, and honestly vulnerable and transparent about the traumas we may have experienced, particularly in the workplace. And I know we are going to continue to talk a little bit about boards and board dynamics, but traditionally, uh, and I think in an unhealthy nature, boards have done a lot of questioning without asking questions, and it's
mm-hmm,
created trauma.
mm-hmm,
And when you haven't healed from your trauma, you see everything through that lens. And
mm-hmm.
when you see it through that lens, it's hard to delineate whether someone is coming from a good place with good intentions,
Sure.
or they're coming from a place where they're really trying to do, aha, I got you.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Right.
And so that I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Fabulous.
Yeah,
Okay, great. So let's move to the other topic that you about boards. So moving into our third segment. Yeah. This
yeah,
is just, I could talk to you, I think, for 3 hours, but to keep the program at
yeah,
its length that it's supposed to be. The third area is community engagement and board leadership, right? And so in with respect to this, kind of my first question, if we could talk just a little bit about how you've been so successful engaging the community and making sure that the community voice and the interest and the perspective is reflected in the work that you're doing. And you're doing this work with community, not to the community.
yeah. I'm glad you said that because I was going to say the same thing. It's with the community, not for the community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say one way we've been really successful, and I would say this is very non-traditional, is we compensate people for the most valuable thing they have and that's their time.
Time. Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting because often in these efforts, we want to involve the community, right? And it's typically a community that's disenfranchised or lacking resources. And the greatest resource we have is our time. And so we ask a community with probably the least amount of disposable income and disposable time to give that time for free so they can help us do the job to help them, um,
Mm-hmm.
not be in the position that they're in. And so I think that's totally backwards. I think that, we need to make sure that we value people's time and we compensate them for that. And
Mm-hmm.
so a couple of examples we have something called our VIPs, our Village Impact Promoters, where
Mm-hmm.
we have 8 individuals that come from our community that we pay quarterly to be involved in this work. So whether that's coming to these meetings or coming to different activities, community events, or coming to board meetings or whatever the case may be, we
Mm-hmm.
make sure that we compensate them for their time because it's valuable. Another example
Mm-hmm.
is we have a similar amount of teen executives that work here at the warehouse year round. And so
Mm-hmm.
they help guide everything that we do here at the warehouse. And again, we compensate them 15 hours a week for that time. We're talking about high school students that are making,
Mm-hmm.
for high school students, a significant earning, but the value that they're bringing is
Mm-hmm.
tenfold. And so, why would we ask them to volunteer if we are literally fundraising off the backs of them? And quite honestly, as CEO, I'm making money off of the backs of them. So
Mm-hmm.
that's backwards to me. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's something that we need to look at to incorporate into our business plan for our this particularly this tax exempt business sector. I don't like to use the word
I
nonprofit.
agree with you. And
Yeah,
I am a full supporter of that. It should be run like a business. It just is. It's not
exactly.
profit making. Um, so First Aid Educate has a similar program that we're trying to launch in 2025, where we're calling them ambassadors, really. But the idea is to compensate members of
Right.
the community for dedicating their time, which I would agree with you is their most valuable resource, to attend a board meeting or to engage other people in the community and to sort of organize the voice and to make sure that that voice is reflected back to the board, because there's not a naturally occurring mechanism in the and we could explore why that might be, but there's not a naturally existing mechanism where community voice just channels to the board.
Yeah.
And unless we do something differently, I don't see how that's going to change.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So this VIP model that you have, I think that's something. I mean, it's also important to point to it as like an example of success, because some of the work we're trying to do hasn't been done before, at least in
Exactly.
Delaware, right? And so people are like, well, why would you pay somebody to go? And you've got it. You need a paradigm shift, really. You need to be able to
Yeah.
understand that we've got to look at it differently, because if we keep doing things the same way, it's not going to change.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Why would you pay somebody that in order to have success? That doesn't make any sense, right?
Any sense, right? No. And I think it's a pretty powerful construct too, because when you do elevate that voice, it becomes something that leaders or elected officials need to listen to. You can't ignore it. And but if there's
Yeah.
no place for it, if there's no channel, so anyway, so I'm hopeful that by the end of the year we'll make some progress in that regard.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
boards.
good luck.
Thank you. I may call you for a couple tips as it unfolds, since you've had this. So you've served on a lot of different nonprofits, and you've boards of nonprofits, and you've had that gives you great perspective. You're a CEO of a nonprofit, but then you've also, as you mentioned earlier, sort of you've been seated on the other side of the table. So why talk to me a little bit about why you think boards are important, and what's the role that they play, either to a nonprofit, but then bear in mind that sort of with the respect to school boards too. I mean, what's the role of a board as an advisor?
Yeah, it's it's probably the worst question you ever want to ask me. I don't think boards are important.
Okay.
Um, Not in the traditional way that they've existed. And so when you talk about a paradigm shift, I don't know when this happened, but at some point, someone decided that boards, particularly in this tax exempt business sector, are to be this overarching governing force that dictates certain ways the business should be run,
Mhm.
but is far removed from the business that they don't really understand the business and the fact that it's supposed to be a business, right? And so, if you look at, and I am going to use the word this time, the nonprofit sector, a nonprofit is created to solve for a society ill. And I would say the key word is solve, right? And I think for far too long, nonprofits have been putting band-aids on the situation and have focused, we would call it navel gazing, right? Have
Mhm,
just
mhm,
focused on themselves and say, all right, well,
mhm,
we need to have a sustainable business or a sustainable organization that can stay a business and do more with less. And people
mhm,
are going to work for peanuts to solve some of the world's greatest problems. And we're going to have success doing it. And I don't understand that just that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about boards, I think boards are essential if they are constructed the right way and they
Mm-hmm.
understand the role that they should be serving, which is
Mm-hmm.
to help the leadership of the organization actually put itself out of business.
Mm.
And by
Mm-hmm.
doing so, you create a business that has capacity, that has the
Mm-hmm.
resources to actually solve for the problem. So the problem is no longer a problem. And if we
Mm-hmm.
have boards that actually see themselves and the role that they could play to support that vision, then I would
Mm-hmm.
have no problem with boards and the role that they serve.
Mm-hmm. And on that, the tail end of that answer is a little bit, I think I'm hearing something about accountability, sort of what
Yeah,
accountability does the board member have in solving the identified problem?
exactly.
And right now it's
Exactly.
really, I mean, generally it's the evaluation of the person in charge of the nonprofit, right? And that's kind of where it starts and stops.
Yeah, and honestly, the role of the board is they have a fiduciary responsibility. They have the
Mm-hmm.
responsibility, yes, to evaluate the CEO to make sure that the CEO is doing the job that the CEO is
Mm-hmm.
hired to do. And then there are other responsibilities on the mission, and just make sure that the organization is focused on the mission.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's pretty much the role of the board.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to minimize that role, because it sounds like, at the outset of that, it's really, it's not a big deal, but it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're supporting the CEO and the CEO is actually running the business, if you're focused on the mission and the CEO, making sure that the CEO is focused on the mission, and then you're making sure that the fiduciary responsibility you have is taken care of,
Mm-hmm.
that I think that's a heavy enough lift. But the brunt of what happens falls on the CEO. And so if we really want to look at how to do this the right way, I think we really need to study the private sector a lot more, because
Mm-hmm.
there isn't much difference between the private sector
Mm-hmm.
and the nonprofit sector. We are looking to generate a profit every year and then reinvest that profit into the business, into the community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but yet we want to do it at pennies on the dollar. Um, it's interesting, we'll invest billions of dollars into, solving for cancer, and other diseases, but we don't want to invest with that same, I would say, same passion and energy into the societal problems that are actually the underlying causes for most of those
Mm-hmm.
diseases and those social determinants of health. I'm talking about
Mm-hmm.
education, I'm talking about neighborhood and place,
Right.
and all
Right.
of the things that really drive those factors that create the diseases that we're suffering from. So if we really invested where we needed to invest, I think that, that is the tide that will lift all the boats.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, and you articulated that very well. So that's great that we'll have that soundbite because I think it's a meaningful, no, it's a meaningful, we're trying to elevate the conversation. We're trying to get new thoughts out there, a different way of solving this. And I think the investment, especially in the context where you're looking at the state considering changing the funding formula. Okay, is that going to be an investment in solving some of the social determinants of, the quality of life for people?
Right.
And if that's true, then what's the appropriate level of accountability and responsibility for the person who receives that money to invest it well to produce a return on that investment?
Yeah. Yeah.
And people equally don't like, I mean, I agree with you that a nonprofit should be run like a business. I mean, I don't understand how it could be done differently. And I also have that same thought in terms of school districts. I think there it's a lot of money, and there's a portfolio of investments, and the person who is responsible for that budget and the people who are signing off that this is an okay way to invest it have to have some ability to say, I made this investment, it worked, it didn't work, we should do it again, we shouldn't do it again, we should do more of it, we only need about a half of it, and that savings that I get, I can put it into something else, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the kind of conversation, I mean, in my opinion, unfortunately, that predominates.
Yeah.
But I think it's necessary.
Yeah, yeah, we've had to have those conversations, and I can tell you the return on the investments of certain activities and programs that we have. I can tell you that our Rise program at the warehouse has a $10 return for every dollar invested. I can
Nice.
tell you that our Empower program has a $6.50 return on every dollar invested. And I can tell you that every year we're producing 100% kindergarten readiness, which has an $8.60 return on every dollar invested to the economy. And so when you understand that and you're able to articulate that, I think it bodes for a better argument of why you're investing the way you're investing.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation, Logan. Like I said, I could go on forever. I'm taking a lot of tidbits for myself. This last little bit on the ROI, I'm going to go back and see if I can do something with that. I am going to look a little bit closer into your VIP program. But I think for our audience, really the fact that you took of your time, you're very, very busy, I know, but to talk to us about the importance of diversity of thought, about the importance of constant communication and building that trust. And when it's not there, how do you do that? Noting that, work happens at the speed of trust. I think that was a great little tidbit. The other thing I want to just highlight that you said was, coming back to that question, what's good for kids? What's good for the community? What's good for the thing that we exist in service of? So this has been a fabulous conversation with you. I'm so grateful. I wish you continued success in everything that you do. And, we're here as a support if there's anything we can do to advance that work.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work that you and your colleagues and everyone involved with First Aid Educate you're doing on a daily basis. As you know, we definitely need it. We have a long way to go here in Delaware. We're here to show some examples of what can be done in the neighborhood level, and love to support any of the work you're doing from the neighborhood level and see how we can expand it across the entire state.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and I look forward to seeing you on our next episode.